Since Chair Benoit is having trouble connecting to the meeting, we're going to start it now. We have a quorum, and this is the October 20th Stationary Source Committee meeting here at CC8 in Diamond Bar. We have at least one remote location with Supervisor Nelson joining us. And the first item on our agenda is the permit application backlog reduction report by Dr. Kasopoulos.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. So this was supposed to be our end-of-the-year report of the fiscal year that we just finished. Of course, I was supposed to give this presentation last month. It slipped by a month, and meanwhile, we completed, the first quarter of this fiscal year. So I slightly changed my presentation to update it and incorporate the first quarter results as well. So this past year, we focused our efforts in implementing the backlog reduction plan that we brought to the board's attention last year. And as you may recall, we had a 2-year horizon and a 50% reduction on our pending application inventory figure. And we managed through our efforts over the last year to improve our production rates. And we have exceeded our goals that we have set for our first year. And I have a few slides later on that I'll explain this in a little bit more detail.
We are crunched for time, so let's take it.
Vacancies. So the numbers are trending in the right direction. And for the last 5 quarters, we registered progress. We are 41% down from where we started last year. It's the lowest that we've ever been in the last 30 years. And we have managed to do this at the 50% of the allotted budget. So we are doing well. Our production rates, when you compare application received versus application processed, over the last year, which is the last 2 pairs, our applications processed far exceeded the applications received, which is a marked departure from how we were running our shop a year and a half prior to that. In terms of the established goals for application processed and permits to construct received, we exceeded our annual targets by 38% and 32% respectively. So all in all, we have been exceeding our quarterly targets for the first 5 quarters handsomely, and we are 82% of the way where we need to be by the end of the 2-year effort. So in terms of the metrics that we have developed, that we have made, that we present to this committee, and now they are available to the public on our website. We are presenting the pending application figures at the end of each month, which shows a 41% reduction at the end of September. And it provides a granularity that shows the age distribution of the different permits. And in actuality, things are even better than what this metric would suggest, because we are including here everything that we could find in the kitchen sink, including the permits to construct that we have already issued, because technically we wait until the permit to operate is issued before we take something off the chart. But because the permits to construct can also serve as temporary permits to operate, we would suggest that we refine this tool and exclude those from this bar. And if we do that, then our pending application count will look even better at approximately 3,000 or so. And we plan to display our progress made using both metrics, with and without the permits to construct issued, moving forward in the future. As happy as we are with the results that we scored so far, we are even more excited and happier with our automation and modernization efforts. We developed tools, online permitting tools, for 3 of our basic equipment: dry cleaners, gas stations, and automated spray booths. And I'm happy to announce this week we went live with the dry cleaners. We had a presentation through our friends, the Small Business Alliance, to the Korean Dry Cleaning Association and the California Dry Cleaning Association, and we are actively seeking volunteers now to participate in that effort. We have prototypes for the gas stations and automated spray booths. that we hope that we can go live by the first quarter of next year. We are currently testing them. So moving forward, we are going to continue our backlog reduction efforts. We are going to continue our automation efforts. And certainly we're going to continue working with our stakeholders start the review of our outdated policies and procedures, and also take a comprehensive look at our expedited permit program. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Any questions from any of the board members before we go to public comment? Hearing none. Do we have any public comment on this item? Thank you, Lockie. Great job. Keep up the good work. Item number 2 is proposed rule 1148.3, requirements for natural gas underground storage facilities. Actually, I am going to recuse myself from this item because I think it affects only one company, and it's a company in which I may have a potential conflict. So someone come get me. I believe you're next in line as in terms of.
So you want to tell us what company it is?
It's Southern California Gas Company, who's a donor to Coalition for Clean Air, which makes it a potential source of income to me.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead, Susan.
so by way of background, proposed staff had briefed the Station Resource Committee in April 2016 on our rulemaking efforts for 1148.3. And 1148.3 is the rule that will address the underground natural gas storage facilities, of which there's 4 in our basin. The key concepts that we had discussed with the Station Resource Committee was fence line and community monitoring, leak detection and repair requirements, optical gas imaging that would be combined with Method 21 for leak detection and repair provisions, and then a notification and communication for the surrounding community. So since then, CARB has completed their regulation for greenhouse gases that establishes standards for crude oil and natural gas facilities. And they have 6 categories, of which includes underground natural gas storage facilities. And the rule has now been approved by the Office of Administrative Law. And the key features of their regulation is much of what we were proposing in proposed Rule 1148.3. It requires submittal of a monitoring plan, which is due in January 2018. It requires that there be audio and visual inspections of the wellheads every 24 hours, that there's quarterly leak detection and repair requirements, and requirements to use OGI as well as Method 21. And then if they find a leak, they're required to notify agencies based on their levels for methane exceedances. So when staff began our work on 1148.3, at that time the CARB regulation lacked specificity in the monitoring plan. And as the CARB regulation evolved, much of the concepts that we had were embodied in the regulation. And so staff is of the belief now that it would probably make more sense for us to rely on the CARB regulation. And there's certain areas that we want to continue working with CARB, and we've had discussions with them. One area is in regards to the critical components, and they have a provision for when they're doing their leak detection, and if there's a repair that's needed on what's referred to as a critical component, that the facility would have up until they need to do a shutdown to repair it, or up to 12 months. And our concern is that there's no threshold on that particular critical component, and our belief based on our implementation, our Rule 1173 for refineries, that we don't designate any critical components. So we want to work with CARB in regards to how critical components are defined and what that repair time would be. And so that's probably one of the most critical areas that we want to continue working with them. The other areas in regards to the number and location of community monitors, that was another aspect of proposed Rule 1148.3 that we felt would be kind of veer a little bit from the CARB regulation, and we've had discussions with them, and they're willing to work with us to have something that would be kind of tailored for our area. And then the third area of discussion with them is the applicability of SoCal Gas's Montebello storage facility, which is in the midst of being decommissioned, and its applicability in the CARB regulation and what would actually be required of that particular facility as they move forward in implementing the CARB regulation. So staff's recommendation at this point is that we work with CARB to enter into an MOA to define the implementation of the CARB regulation, and that we continue to work on the implementation, but we suspend the rule development for 1148.3. Our rule schedules, we're starting to plan it for 2018 is quite aggressive in terms of some of the rules that we need to bring forward as part of 617 and some of the toxics. We think that with the existing CARB regulation that this is something that should be a lower priority and we should just kind of suspend it at this point. Any comments or questions?
The questions of it's not more. Just one question. If you suspended, it means you could go back and reintroduce
Right.
and proceed with it. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Is any public comment on this matter? Not seeing any. Thank you for the presentation. We will.
Have Joe come back.
Oh yeah. Move on.
We have our chair yet?
No, he's not online yet.
Okay.
So it's up to
So
you.
we're on item 3, proposed amendment to 1466, control of particulate emissions
So
from soils and toxics.
back in July, the governing board adopted Rule 1466. This rule is addresses toxic air contaminants when moving soil movement, and the board had directed us at the adoption hearing to go back and to expand the list of toxic air contaminants. And so this is what this proposal is doing, is expanding the list of toxic air contaminants to include the other types of toxics, pesticides, herbicides, other metals, persistent bioaccumulative toxics, and semi-volatile organic compounds. We've had 2 working group meetings, public workshop, and today we're here to take us through that process to bring the rule to the board in December. Applicability of the rule, we want to have it's really a slight change in the applicability. We still will rely on the oversight agencies, EPA, DTSC, the regional and state water boards and the designation, but as we've learned more recently is that they can designate to a local agency, the CUPA, fire, health agencies, and or the facility can actually kind of defer to those agencies too. So we found it as somewhat of a loophole that somebody could then start designating to these local agencies and then say they're therefore exempt from the rule. So we're going to clarify in that applicability that those other agencies and their designation would still suffice for the applicability of the rule. So in terms of the expansion of the toxic air contaminants, we have the 9 toxic air contaminants that the board adopted in July. We're going to expand that to the dioxins, which are the key dioxins that are listed in our Rule 1401 list. We're going to add pesticides and PAHs, but then we're going to allow for when the executive officer designates the site that it would be all those that are listed to the left, plus any of the Rule 1401 or California Code of Regulation toxic air contaminants, with the exception of VOCs. This expands the list. These are not the ones that are the more prominent ones that we see in these types of sites, but gives us the ability, if we need to also bring in those sites. This is just a list of the toxic air contaminants that are going to be included. Other clarifications in the proposed rule is in regards to clarifying the monitors in terms of those types of monitors and the exact model, calibration, other configurations associated with those monitors. We've also added in the notification requirements that if they extend the time to do their cleanup and other changes in their particular project and the start date, that they have to re-notify us. And then also we added a provision towards the tail end of when we were working on the original 1466 in July that allowed linear sewer projects that they would be exempt from certain provisions of signage, fencing, and monitoring. So it's come to our attention that there's other types of projects that are very similar that have linear trenching, natural gas, water, and power projects, so we're adding that into the proposal also. So this rule is scheduled to be set in November with a December hearing. Any comments or questions?
Questions or comments from the board members before we go to public comment? Why exempt VOCs?
They're covered in 1166.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Any comments from members of the public? Come on down and introduce yourself, Bill. You've got 3 minutes, but we won't complain if you take less.
It will be less. Bill Pierce, the Mowing Company. Just wanted to thank Mike Morris and Lou Bo working with us on incorporating some of our comments. Just had one key comment, actually a couple. We appreciated the comment about 1166. We've been looking forward to seeing the final language, just to ensure that was incorporated in the rule. The other item, we're still waiting to see the final. I guess there's now a notification form that's been being developed, and we're still waiting to see that. But we have a concern over one of the requirements that'll be in there is that a requirement for notifying the district if the start date's going to change, and we're usually working with 3 or 4 different agencies on these jobs. And for instance, we just did a job a couple weeks ago, and the local fire department put us off for 5 different days because something else more important kept coming up. And so if we understand it correctly, this will trigger 5 different notifications to the district. And so we're just trying to see how that's going to work, but we haven't yet seen the actual form, and that's just a comment.
So we've been working on the a web notification form, and then we want to test that with a working group. And so I'm not sure exactly how far we are, but we're very close. We've been working. There's a couple other divisions that we've been working with in regards to just getting all the language right on that. In regards to the start date and the reason why we feel that's important, we've working with our compliance staff. They feel that if we don't have the revision on the start date, that they may go out to a site thinking that the start date was going to be, on Friday, and then they go out there and then they find out that the start date's not till next Friday. So they want to have that ability to go out to a site and not necessarily notify the operator that they're going to be going out to the site. So we feel that there's that importance on the start date.
And I guess for us, as opposed to the other agencies, I mean, for you, my understanding is that there'll be a fee involved each time, and and we're just trying to understand the value of continuing to make these notifications day after day, because usually South Coast permits are the long tent to pull. We like for 1166, we'll pull those permits first, and then we're working with the other agencies for when they want to come in and evaluate something. But usually they're more. Our jobs are normally when they're just soil removal or something. A lot of times they'll get pushed down the list, and so when they say they might want to come out, then they cancel, and we just have to keep rescheduling. And we're just worried here. We're just going to get into this endless loop of re-notifying all the time because of what other agencies are doing. And so that was just a concern about whether there was any value in that particular. I mean, we have no problem calling the district and letting them know something's, but it's just when it starts getting into where it's a fee every day for making that change.
We can look at that.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
That
Thank
should
you.
be justified, I would think.
Any other public comments? I did see we received a comment letter from environmental justice advocates asking for us to be more inclusive in terms of the list of topics. What's staff's response to that?
We did that.
You did that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we'll see what they have to say about it. Any other comments, Supervisor Nelson? Anyone in Orange County? No.
And Joe, I don't know if you guys can see me there in the room, but I'm online.
Oh, great. You want me to continue to chair?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that since I can't see the room other than on the YouTube,
Okay.
which we got a 10 or 12 second delay. So
Great.
keep
Well,
on the meetings doing stuff.
Glad you're able to join. We are now on item number 4, which is proposed rule 1180 for petroleum refinery fence line and community air monitoring. A rather dynamic issue.
Yes.
All right, thank you, members of the committee. Philip Klein. I think it was last month or 2 months ago, we came with 1180 and to the committee, and the advice of the committee was to move the rule from November to December, which we did. There's been some developments that have changed a little bit of the direction. I think it's not a big change in direction, but we just wanted to give the committee an update of where we stand. We did hold another working group meeting, but the real change was that the governor actually signed AB 1647 into law. And this bill requires air monitoring, fence line monitoring at systems. It provides a date by which they need to be implemented, which wasn't too far off of what we were proposing in 1180, but does change us slightly. And then also who's going to be doing that monitoring. So just back to the working group, we've had a lot of robust working groups, a lot of comments on we should measure all pollutants and all refineries, including even the smaller asphalt facilities. There's been a lot of comments on making sure that these air monitoring requirements that are coming down are consistent with 1647 or consistent with what might be coming in 617. So we're working very hard to make sure that, you know, when we do a monitoring deployment, we can satisfy all these requirements at the same time. And then a lot of discussion about how notification is done. If you're measuring something and you get a high level, how is that information provided to the public, and when, and in what context is that information provided? Just real quick, back to 1640-17, again, the governor signed it on October 8th. By January 1st, 2020, it actually, when we were working on 1180, we were going to require the facilities to do the fence line monitoring, and we were providing options for whether the district would conduct the community monitoring or perhaps the facility can conduct the community monitoring. 1647 clarified that for us. The district will be conducting the community monitoring. And the petroleum refinery shall be responsible for that cost. So this was already an option in our rule, but now it's not going to be so much an option as what state law requires. So it's not major tweaks to where we were headed, but just a little bit on the date and how we're going to do the community monitoring. Applicability is something we're still working on a little bit because the state law is a little bit vague about what the applicability is. They just use the term petroleum refinery. We're trying to make sure it covers our 7 large facilities by this rule. There's a big gap between those and like some of the smaller facilities like asphalt plants that actually don't do a lot of refining. It's a small part of their operation. So, so we're looking at the throughput and the capacity of the refineries and trying to base some applicability based on that. There's some other ways we're doing that. We just want to make sure we're consistent with state law. And again, the refineries will have to do the fence line systems. The districts will have to develop guidance and guidelines for how to do that. We were already working on that in 1180. We had a separate document. And actually, as you heard in testimony, at last time this came before committee, we were much further along on the fence line guidance than we were on the community monitoring guidance. We'd actually had requests to bifurcate it anyway, so we're just kind of following through with that bifurcation. So now it's, instead of fence line and community air monitoring, it's fence line monitoring. This is what would be required from the facilities to present to us to be consistent with the guidelines, and that there will be guidelines. These are the guidelines we're developing. But again, we pulled the community piece out of the guidelines. We will have to, by state law, develop our own kind of work plan and guidelines for the monitoring we will be conducting. But it doesn't have to necessarily be done within 1180. Within 1180, what we'd like to do is establish this cost recovery that state law requires. So, so what we're doing is, again, we had these options in 1180 before that it could be refinery conducting community monitoring or us conducting community monitoring. There's no longer an option. We will be doing it. What just needs to be worked out is that cost recovery. So we're looking at providing in 1180 some fees or cost recovery provisions to provide to the district. There's going to be upfront costs for equipment, and then there's going to be ongoing costs. And how that goes into 1180 or our regulation free on fees is something we're still working out, but hope to get make significant progress over the next week or so and be able to bring this to December. Again, it's been an extensive public process. The September meeting was in Wilmington. It was about 3 hours long. We got a lot of good input. We've had the public workshop. We think we're ready for December. Just a few details to work out on mostly the cost recovery. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Great. Yeah, Judy, go ahead.
For the community monitoring, does 1647 set the boundaries for community? What is the community, or do we set the boundaries?
No, it does not. It essentially puts that on the districts to develop their guidelines essentially for themselves. Essentially it becomes like a work plan, a monitoring plan for us to be able to cover all the objectives that are within 1647. And we're going to be bringing some of those objectives into 1180 to hold us accountable to that as well, and also provide some certainty as to the fee structure, like what those fees are going to go towards. But it's a little bit open of what kind of monitoring, and whether it's the traditional monitoring or low-cost sensors or remote sensing, and it could be a combination of all the above. And we think we just want to use the best technology for each application and make sure it achieves the objectives.
So I assume we will set some kind of radius from the refinery that is going to be included in the monitoring, or what are you contemplating?
I mean, that's one way to do it. I think there's other ways to just look at the nearest downwind communities and make sure you have sufficient spatial coverage and measurements. Because typically, I mean, for the most part, the closer you are, the higher the concentrations are. I know there's exceptions if it's a tall stack or other types of upset conditions, flares may be coming out high, but we have a lot of data, we have a lot of history on those. I think we know generally where we want to place monitors.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what is or what isn't downwind changes a bit.
Yeah.
There happened to be a fire at the refinery I live downwind from the other evening, but it happened at midnight when the wind was blowing north and east, so my sensors didn't pick up a thing.
Right. We figure it'll be maybe more than one site per refinery, but then you also have these clusters of refineries, so one site could serve as downwind of multiple facilities, and other facilities may need 1 or 2 or 3 sites to cover the different. And then the low-cost sensors, if we can get those working, especially if we can get the VOC sensors working, as admin committee approved an item to embark on a project on that, could be very useful in getting much better spatial coverage for a lot less cost.
The other thing is how this requirement intersects with 617. We
Again,
thought about that.
yeah. So we don't obviously have the state level guidelines that they're working on. We're actively working with CARB to make sure those guidelines are not duplicative but more complementary to all the AB 1647 and our current efforts, our ongoing efforts. So we're trying to bring all those together. It is quite possible that the refineries will fund a large portion of these monitoring stations in these communities, but we may have to supplement them with some other pollutants that may not be as relevant to refineries to satisfy 617. Right. But we hopefully are getting other funding to do that from the state as well.
And on that point, I would just add that we've had multiple meetings. We've had 3 high-level meetings between Bay Area, South Coast, and ARB, rotating amongst our locations. And then we've had staff meetings on a weekly basis. Yeah. So we're working very closely to try to refine and have a very holistic approach, trying to bring together, if you will, the experience that both agencies bring to the table. It's a learning process, and there's some tension, I think, that's always natural at the onset of these new programs, but we're working through it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I had a couple, and I know that we made an award for the surrounding Torrance refinery with the use of the penalty funds. With regard to the alert issue, it certainly would be helpful, I think, if we could use that process, right, to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I mean, that is going to roll out pretty quickly, we hope, and I would assume that there was an alert process that was going to be built into that contract.
Yeah, so there were 2 contracts that the board approved. One was with Sonoma Technologies to put in the monitoring, and that one included fence line. Mm-hmm. This was before 1647, and then provide, I would call it more notifications to the community if you're by subscription. But there was another contract with the city of Torrance to update their alert system, because they have access to things like reverse 911 and other types of things that can do alerts on your phone, which perhaps Sonoma Tech would not have access to. So what we'll be working with as part of the project is to make sure the data that flows from the Sonoma Tech monitoring equipment flows to the city in a way that they can react quickly and put out an alert.
Yeah. I think we want to do both. We want to have alerts, but it would be nice also for people to be able to see reports. if they wanted to, get a periodic report of what was.
And that'll be on the Sonoma Tech side of the project. They can provide
Plus
those
they
reports.
generally for the implementation of the regulation.
Yeah.
The other thing too, obviously, we don't know exactly what we're gonna be monitoring. It looks like perhaps VOCs more generally, not speciation of them, right?
So, not necessarily.
Not necessarily,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, more information the better. I
Yeah.
always believe that. And I would assume some PM monitoring, especially with some low-cost ones that are available and prove to be highly accurate. The thing that then leads to is the issue of data interpretation and explanation, because people are gonna wanna know, I base this on experience, what it all means. So I hope that you're working on being able to explain to them the rather complex, convoluted absence of health-based regulations for collecting this kind of data, but also in the context of what it does really mean. Because if we can't make it meaningful for people, it's just numbers.
Yeah, and again, back to the kind of the pilot project in Torrance, I mean, that's a big part of that project is to make sure all the data is put in context. You have community involvement up front. You have that outreach to kind of give ideas about how to react to data and what it means in terms of health. And hope that will probably be, a few months ahead of this effort. So that'll really help us get our feet wet and how to provide those materials, have websites that put everything in context. There's good ways to do that, and there's not so good examples of how to do that. So we'll be working through that, and then as we move forward, even beyond 1180 on the fence line, as we develop our own work plan, the district is going to have a major monitoring effort on their hands, funded by the refineries, with multiple sites across multiple cities just for 1647. We want to have an open process as we're developing that work plan across all the sites, and that part of that will be how we communicate results.
And I'm sure you'll be sharing whatever we're doing with the rest of CAPCOA because we're on the leading edge of this, right? We're up front with Torrance. Do we have members of the public who'd like to comment on this item? Come on up.
Good morning. I'm Bridget McCann with WISPA. So WISPA, we've really appreciated the collaborative rulemaking process that's transpired through the development of proposed Rule 1180. We've been actively participating in all the working group meetings, provided written comments, had meetings with staff, and then we provided verbal comments at the public workshop and then at the last Stationary Resource Committee meeting. So we appreciate the proposed changes to 1180 to harmonize with 1647. However, we believe that any cost recovery measures or fee mechanisms associated with community monitoring should be moved to Regulation 3 rulemaking to be consistent with past district practice and then AB 1647, and also to ensure an effective cost mechanism for a sustainable monitoring program moving forward. No information has been provided yet in writing on what a cost recovery mechanism would entail in Regulation 11, and it's not been presented or discussed yet at any of the working groups. So we really understand the time constraints of AB 1647 and the pressure it puts on district staff and then also on stakeholders. So we're prepared to participate as soon as practicable in a Regulation 3 rulemaking for community monitoring in the fee rule. So,
Thank you.
thanks.
Does staff have any response to that?
So again, we're working through these issues. There's kind of like two sets of costs that need to be recovered. One is like these initial costs to get equipment, to get sites set up over the until 2020. And the other is ongoing operational costs. So one approach would be to put those kind of upfront costs as a one-time cost within 1180, and then Reg 3 next May, we can establish some ongoing fees for that. But I think we're open to different approaches. It's just everyone wants to get started because time is short, and we want to make sure the refineries know what they need to do, know what their costs are. So we're going to work with WISPA to try to come to some agreement before December on this.
Okay, you're running out of time. Any other questions or comments?
Plenty of time.
We're up in between
Yeah.
2 and 6 a.m.
Supervisor Kuehl operates on a different space-time continuum than the rest of us. I'm sure you do. Any public comments at any of our remote locations, our 2 remote locations? Okay. Great, then I think we can wrap this up. Thanks, Phil. We appreciate it. Bring us to Reclaim Quarterly Report. Tracy, down the other end of the table. Look how quickly we're getting through this.
Don't jinx us.
I
I was worried.
Tracy, you never take up too much time.
I try not to. I try not to. So thank you very much. Good morning. Back in May, we presented our initial transition plan for Reclaim, for transitioning the program to a command and control structure. At that time, the governing board requested that we come back with quarterly reports. And this is a carryover from last month. And we've originally we were having 3 working groups, but we also had one last week. So we've had 4 working groups since May, and we've had 25 meetings with individual facilities and trade groups. One thing I would like to point out, just in case you didn't know, back in September 14th, EPA approved the 2015-2016 reclaim amendments into the SIP. So notably the 12 ton per day shave and the facility closure provisions. So I just wanted to highlight that. One of the challenges that we have before us is AB 617. It's expedited rulemaking for our largest sources that are in reclaim, namely the refineries, by requiring us to adopt a BARC schedule by the end of next year and implementation by December 31st, 2023. And so we're looking to prioritize that rulemaking over the next 12 months. We continue to assess our transition plan by looking at that urgency for the larger facilities, still wanting to be able to comply certainty on a BARC schedule for those facilities in the short term. But we are looking at adding some resources to help us get the job done. When it comes to evaluation for BARCs, we're looking at what we call our landing rules, or the rules the facilities can go to. We're focusing on rules that are currently at BART, rules that need to be amended to have BART, or whether or not we need to actually adopt new rules. So some of the amendments we're looking to do to reclaim is to not allow any new entries into reclaim. So that's going to be our first order of business for rulemaking. Looking at what are the mandatory exits for the facilities that can easily transition out of the program. Early voluntary exits for those folks that want to go ahead and exit that are already at BART, or all their equipment is Rule 219 exempt. And then working on additional transition provisions such as timing, new source review, and permitting. So we've got parallel activities going on currently, amendments to the Reg 20 itself, looking at our regulation BARC rules, working internally and with our working group to address NSR issues and permitting. And then we're planning on having this transition document, a living document, so people can go back and they can keep track of where we are in the process. When we look at evaluation of landing rules, we're looking at the ones that are like up to date with BARC, such as Rule 1146. We're also looking at all those other rules that we need to amend. Notably, it looks like we could, through the whole process, not just because of AB 617, have to amend up to 27 rules and adopt 5 new rules, such as for coke calcining and tail gas units. What we've done, and this is just an example of the type of evaluation we're conducting, we've gone facility by facility, looking at the number of equipment they have and whether those facilities emit greater or less than 4 tons. And in doing so, what we're trying to do is identify the facilities that are at BART, whether or not there's landing rules, and then what are the easiest steps to get them out of the reclaim program and into a command and control structure. So looking at the facilities with less than 5 pieces of equipment, there's 135 facilities. There's 90 facilities that have equipment that are subject to our BART rules. Some of those facilities, about 40, are already at BART, and we believe that they can be exited out of the program early. The remainder, the rules are at BART, but they need additional time added to those rules before we transition those facilities out of the program. And then we'll continue with the facilities on the right and the other facilities to continue to assess the landing rule situation. So some of the key elements, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking to amend Rule 2001 to not add any new facilities in reclaim, and that no facilities can elect to enter reclaim. That's really our first order of business. So the next concepts in looking at Rule 2002 is for mandatory exit provisions to reassess existing provisions such as for electrical generating facilities, and then look at concepts for what we called structural buyers. Those are the ones that came into the program that did not have an initial allocation. So our first initial rulemaking we're looking at is for the first quarter of next year, and hoping to bring Rule 2001 in January. So our next line of business is to work on those high priority rules, work on a rule development schedule. When it comes to looking at some of the larger facilities like refineries and power plants, we're looking at grouping rule amendments together so that we can have not just every month have a different rule, but try to group the rules as best we can. And we're also working with our working group to look at, like I said, those NSR issues and permitting and continue to develop that transition plan. So with that, if there's any questions?
Does anyone have any questions based off the presentations? It seemed to me when I went through the slides, more slowly than you did, that staff was kind of, it's like a facility's in or a facility's out. Yet when I think about where the priority should be, it should be where the emission reductions can be had. The greatest emission reductions can be had the soonest.
Mm-hmm.
And I was under the impression that that might be taking out certain types of equipment from the system and the credits that are associated with it, but not necessarily the whole facility. So when you have a refinery that doesn't have control equipment on it, that can get us a lot of emission reductions and perhaps, I don't know, I'd love to see the emissions analysis of where those emission reduction opportunities are with getting debarked and with the reclaimed facilities. But it's my impression that the vast majority are from refineries without control equipment.
Right.
And that we could perhaps adopt a landing rule for just that and then pull those credits out of the system and allow the refineries to stay in while we find all the ways to deal with the other complexities. Is that a possibility? Can we approach it that way?
Well, I think Phil may want to add in, but part of it is, do you want a facility that's under two regulatory structures? How do you deal with the permits?
But they already have rules that apply to them. I mean,
they do, but it's just more of the, I think, the administrative.
Yeah, so I think that's possible. But what we're really focusing on, particularly for refineries, is to come in by the end of next year with an overarching refinery rule that covers all major equipment at refineries. And that's a tough one. It's going to take a lot of work, but we're going to really shoot for by the end of next year to do that. We'll be kicking off that process. And not just refineries. We've identified 4 or 5 high priority rules: refineries, power plants, kind of the larger 1147 type equipment, furnaces that just don't have a rule. Or they're under 1147, but just because the larger units, since they were under reclaim, there was no need to come in and have a bark rule. So there's 4 or 5. Turbines is another one. There's 4 or 5 we want to really get started on and see if we can get them done towards the end of next year.
I didn't think you could do that by the end of next year. So that's why I was thinking we should try to focus on just the pieces of it.
Yeah, and we're really striving because those larger facilities that are in the cap and trade are also in reclaim. And we think by the approach that Phil's lined out, we'll be addressing the bark requirements for virtually all of those facilities by the end of next year. So we're very hopeful.
If you want to add something, Wayne?
No,
All right. Any other
staff covered it.
questions or comments? Members of the public commenting on this item? This non-controversial and simple issue of reclaim. Okay, well, that's great.
Thank you.
We are to the item on TBA, update on draft assessment of tertiary butyl acetate. Dr. Fine, it seemed like a very brief update.
Very brief. We committed to come back and talk about where OEHO was on TBAC. And just so you know, so just a little bit of background, we were in February of last year, we were supposed to reassess the TBAC exemption. And then we released the TBAC assessment earlier this year, and we came to this committee. And generally, the Stationary Resource Committee wanted to wait until the SRP, the State Scientific Review Panel at OEHA, took any further action. So it's now scheduled for December. Hopefully they will take action, and we're recommending to wait for that.
And that's pretty much the update.
Thank you very much.
I think that's pretty straightforward, yes.
So will you come back again after we get the new assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Yes.
I think we are a little bit concerned about time, so, I mean, this is a really toxic thing. What did I say? So I guess we're not slowing it down in any way, obviously, by waiting, that's that's appropriate, but I think sort of in going forward, we expect to see this in December and that,
Yeah, as soon as we get the final determinant, and a lot of the stakeholders have asked the same thing, as soon as OEHA makes their final determination, we will come back
Ready to go.
and talk about the, and propose moving forward, however the board wants, in terms of our current exemptions for TBAC.
thank you.
Great. Other questions, comments, members of the public? Wow, that wraps up those items. Written reports we will receive and file, items 7 and 8. Is there any other business from board members? Hearing none, public comment on items that were not on the agenda? Yes, please.
Good morning, I'm David Rothbart. I'm representing the Southern California Alliance of Locally Owned Treatment Works and wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you about Rule 1110.2 and some concerns our members are having regarding implementing that rule. Just as a quick reminder, Rule 1110.2 that pertains to our facilities regulates biogas from engines burning biogas. And essentially, it's something very challenging for wastewater treatment plants because biogas contains certain contaminants like beauty products have siloxanes, other things that are not natural gas. Unfortunately, 1110.2 requires us to meet the same levels as natural gas when you use an engine. So it's very challenging and very expensive to use the technology that's been proven. 2 of our members have tried alternative technologies that wouldn't require biogas cleaning. So it makes it much more easy, hypothetically, to actually run these engines more cost effectively. Both of these entities have spent millions of dollars trying to do true research to get this technology to work and have really hit a dead end. I have one of the members here today that can give you some more details. And it's just, it seems like something as far as they've done their best, they've tried their best to get this technology to work, and now as the next year approaches, there are going to be penalties for them to continue this research. So it seems like since they did the right thing, tried to get technology to be advanced, maybe there's something that could be done to help them out. Just as a point as far as a cost, one of my members is putting in the technology, SCR, on a biogas engine. It's a small facility, and it's harder for small facilities. They're reporting to me that the actual cost, including operational cost to them, it'd be about $900,000 per ton of NOx removed. So they're saying it's very expensive. They're doing it because they're a public entity. A lot of the privates are saying, forget it, this is too costly. Our public entities are trying to do the best they can. This is really a challenge. And on top of that, kind of kicking us while we're down, there's a proposed rule to regulate biogas flaring. So just sort of a systematic comment here of, you know, we're trying our best. If we could encourage the use of biogas productively, we'd like to do that. We're just hitting a lot of roadblocks, and whatever you could do to help us out would be appreciated. With that, maybe the city of San Bernardino can give you a little bit more specifics.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is the issue continue to be the removal of siloxanes from the?
It's siloxanes and sulfur compounds that if you're able to easily remove those compounds, then it is natural gas and the technology works just fine. So if there's a way to treat the gas and remove these contaminants reliably, which is a whole subject that could take hours to talk about, it'd be great. We just haven't got there yet. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Kevin Stewart, and I am the Director of Water Reclamation for the San Bernardino Municipal Water Department, which serves the city of San Bernardino and several surrounding cities, many major portions of which are economically disadvantaged communities. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you this morning. My department operates a water reclamation plant which fuels 6 internal combustion engines on digester gas to economically drive treatment plant equipment. Operation of these engines falls under the stationary source exhaust emission limits established in Rule 1110.2. This rule was amended in 2008 to require wastewater treatment plants that operate biogas-fueled engines to significantly reduce emissions, essentially to achieve natural gas emission limits by July 1st, 2012. This has been extended to January 1st of next year. In February 2012, the department was approached by the Gas Technology Institute regarding the potential development of research-level demonstration project at my department's treatment plant. The relationship of the proposed project and the proposed amended Rule 1110.2 was presented to SCAQMD staff and could prove advantageous for facilities such as ours that produce smaller quantities of digester gas or have had issues retrofitting existing systems with costly selective catalytic reduction and fuel pretreatment, the only technology proven to allow digester gas fueled engines to achieve the stricter emissions limits. The department took a very active role in finding a productive use for the digester gas instead of waiting on the sidelines for a proven system to flesh itself out or flaring off the gas. We are scheduled to begin the final phase of testing phase of the demonstration system at the end of this month. Unfortunately, Rule 1110.2 compliance will be required by January 1st of 2018, and we will be required to pay a compliance flexibility fee of approximately $50,000 per quarter to further extend this up to 4 quarters to complete the project. This penalty places an unreasonable burden on the ratepayers for my agency when we have been an instrumental partner in the development of a technology that would benefit many agencies like. In light of the extensive previous efforts to demonstrate the capabilities of this alternate means of reducing emissions and permit agencies such as ours to continue efficiently and economically treating wastewater, the San Bernardino Municipal Water Department respectfully requests the South Coast Air Quality Management District either waive this compliance flexibility and extend further time for this research project or otherwise find relief. I would be happy to provide further information or answer any questions. Thank you very much.
I guess the question would be with staff to how you would like to address the issue.
I just checked with rules staff. This is the first we've heard of this particular issue, and obviously we've been back to the board with 1110.2 many times and extended the date many times, so without knowing the details of the situation. I think the compliance flexibility fee is built into the rule. I'm not sure we even have the authority to waive that. It's a legal question, but it's a little late with January 1st around the corner, so.
I think what we need to do is get some additional information with regards to the program, how you've implemented what you've looked at, your numbers in terms of that, and then we can do an internal review and we'll get back with you.
I think Supervisor Kuhl has it.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is there's a balance here, in addition to wanting time to see if there's a way to work out compliance. And I guess I would want to understand better what are the benefits of what you're doing.
Currently,
because it's been, you know, both of you said this is really important, this is doing so much good. It's likely I know the answer, but I'd like to hear it articulated.
Absolutely. So currently we use our digester gas to fuel the engines, and we get productive benefit out of the gas that naturally is produced from the wastewater treatment process. The only alternative is to flare that off, which also causes emissions that have to be addressed as well. And so this technology that we've pushed forward with, both with other agencies that have tried the traditional only approach that works, the SCR process, in some cases that has not worked as effectively with digester gas from wastewater treatment plants. It worked on a landfill side. The research level project that we've been demonstrating, and we're just right at that final testing phase to see if it works as advertised, essentially injects hydrogen into the engine and blends that with the digester gas to make that engine run cooler, and essentially we can reduce the NOx emissions. And so if, at least in our specific case, if we can have that opportunity to complete the testing phase and see if it functions as advertised, that's what we're hoping to achieve. And hopefully if this actually works, the whole reason that the CEC gave the GTI firm and all of us have worked together, you know, to achieve this, is if we can find an economical solution for other smaller publicly owned treatment works. There are larger technologies that work for large agencies like Orange County, but on the smaller scale, that's what we're hoping to achieve, is to find that economical way to meet NOx emissions without wasting it to flaring.
So in the treatment of wastewater, the byproduct is generated, and the question is how to use it. And you're indicating there are only two ways, essentially, well, three, one would just be escape, flare or utilizing it in vehicles. So that's one.
Well, no, you use it in service.
They use it in their
That's
actual.
another way.
You just identified the fourth way.
And not vehicles, but
Internal combustion engines.
Internal combustion
They burn it in
engines.
internal combustion engines to
Generate
produce
energy.
power.
to make power. Right?
And that power generally runs their plants, so they're self-sufficient. But the bigger challenge that I sort of see is we do want to encourage biogas and we want to encourage reinjection back into the line, whether that could be used as a transportation fuel.
With
or
LCFS
others.
credits and changing the
Right.
dynamics of the economics of it and all that. And
So there's certainly tremendous importance in this work. Because if we can enhance the reinjection back into the pipeline, that's a big benefit for everyone.
And the difficulty for us comes with, it's not a known construction of or a construction of a known value. It's a research project and we've been, battling to get to that end, but as with most research projects, you keep uncovering new things and then you have to address those and then getting outside entities to kind of piece all that together in the timeframes. That's the difficulty.
if I recall correctly, staff had told us that it was less expensive to flare and less emissions. They're easier to achieve the emission requirements. Yet the beneficial use is to generate electricity or generate fuel for natural gas engines, right?
Yes.
So we are stuck in this little complicated scenario here, and certainly we don't want to punish people who got out ahead and tried to help us find a solution, right?
Right. So the only proven method to utilize the gas and produce power was what the gentleman indicated, burning IC engines that are controlled by ACRs. By cleaning up the gas first and then sending it through the IC engines, and through the ACR. Has been demonstrated, works. What they're experimenting with is the hydrogen injection technique that potentially can prove to be a much more cost-effective route of utilizing that biogas and produce power compared to what we have at hand. So it is an innovative way, but we haven't seen the results yet, so we don't know where we are.
When do you think you will see results?
Have information to share with us.
We have scheduled the final testing phase to begin next week, or 2 weeks from now, I should say. And provided everything went perfectly, that would probably take 2 to 3 weeks to complete the testing once we feed hydrogen into the system. However, as this project has demonstrated, nothing has gone, perfectly according to plan. So,
Can staff exercise discretion?
We need to talk with legal, and that's why we were asking for the information, where you are, the process, the timing, and then we can come back to the board with our thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the
Does Dr.
things, I'm sorry.
We will get to you in a second, Mayor Benoit. Supervisor Kuehl has the floor.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we constantly struggle with is how to measure benefits and burdens that are measured by different agencies in different ways. In terms of the use of wastewater and reclaiming water, this is an area, LA San is essentially doing now too. And if there are necessary byproducts, then the question is, good, bad. Do we utilize those, or, is it another kind of expense to deal with them? And what is created reminds me of the MTBE struggle that we had. Everybody had to put MTBE in the gasoline, and it cleaned up the air. Oops! But when it leaked out of the tanks, it settled into much lower groundwater than other elements of gasoline, and so everybody said, "Oh no, it's cleaned up the air and fouled the water," and it essentially, said, "Oops." So I don't know how we really sort of deal with that, because we're also compartmentalized. We're worried about air. Somebody else is worried about water. Fuel affects air, but it also affects, efficiency, use of the roads. I mean, there's all kinds of interplay. But at least between air and water, I think, and the generation of electricity, with the new CCA in Los Angeles County, where we'll be buying pretty much renewable energy, we also have to figure out what is the source of that renewable energy and what are the impacts. Nothing is perfectly clean. We lose 1 million birds because we've got all these, windmills. So I think it would be interesting to know if anybody is doing any more wide scope presentation about good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. Water?
If I might add to that point, the cost, where it kind of paints out in the bigger picture, for us, if we flare the natural gas, or flare the digester gas, that costs us somewhere in the range of about $1.1 million a year to fuel that, all of those pieces of equipment that are currently being run off of those generators. We would have to run that either off natural gas or off of, electricity at greater costs, and we don't unfortunately have, windmills or any renewable sources. So
No, I totally understand. I mean, the sort of anaerobic digesters that are, what are they creating and what are they helping? And now now Campbell Soup doesn't have to throw out all of its carrot tops anymore because it's generating energy. I just mean that there are such different measures and we never actually get, and maybe somewhere in somebody's thesis.
So USCPA is actually supposed to be sort of looking at that
The
broadband
multimedia.
impacts, yeah.
But when we developed the rule, we looked at those issues in pretty good detail. It turns out that nowadays, from the air quality perspective, an economics perspective, burning the biogas in an IC engine and producing power is by far the most cost-effective approach. Unfortunately, the byproducts of that burning, it's pretty severe.
Well, but cost-effective is not necessarily all that we're after here. I think it's clean air.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
I know you were about to say that.
So the rule required the installation of controls, to allow them to harness that power generated, but also at a much cleaner manner. Unfortunately, those controls have a cost associated with it, and the Orange County Sanitation District, they did install a system that came down to the limits we wanted to get. But other smaller sanitation districts are looking for alternative, more cost-effective ways of controlling the emissions, and hence the experimentation here. So it's not an easy issue, and we are, as you pointed out, sometimes it's even less costly to flare. And even when you look at the greenhouse gas impact, in fact,
And less impact.
yeah, the less impact. But it's not a good thing, societal thing, to just waste the biogas generated. So
Ben, you still have a comment?
Yes, I do. I just, Kirk hasn't cut us off yet, so I'm glad we got back to before that happened.
We've got a couple minutes.
We're off the agenda, but, what I just want to comment on is the fact that this is not just affecting wastewater, but also seeing this in our area out here with the El Grande landfill facility by Waste Management. They're in a similar situation, and they've just decided to go back to flaring. And so as staff looks at this, I'm wondering if this is in the same area and we should look at it at the same time. And we need to, obviously, this is a tough needle to thread. Yes, we want to save the gas and use it appropriately, but at the same time, we need to make sure we're doing that in a clean, effective manner for air quality. But anyhow, we definitely need to bring this back and have you the right.
It feels like deja vu. I know we've been through this before. But I assume since the near-term need to figure out what's going to happen on January 1st, staff will meet with all the stakeholders, gather the information, come up with a plan on what to do. But also sounds like we would like to bring the bigger picture issues back to the Stationary Source Committee for conversation.
Well, we're active on Rule 1118.1, which deals exactly with non-refinery flaring, but it deals with all these issues of what do you do with this biogas, and in some cases, non-biogas.
Okay. Thank you so much for your comments. We're going to try to address the issues.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else under public comment? Oh, Florence? Please, do it in 2 minutes, or 1 minute and 40 seconds.
I will
We're
try.
caught up.
Florence Caribbean with the Del Amo Action Committee, and I'm here again to talk about hydrofluoric acid. I was not able to come to the last work group meeting, but I was deeply concerned when I read the material that was presented by the California Energy Commission, which basically said they can't do it, they won't be able to get rid of hydrofluoric acid. And that deeply concerns me because I don't feel that the communities around these refineries should suffer or shoulder the risks associated with the use of this chemical in an environment where no one has been able to demonstrate that if there was a catastrophic release, people would not be, many people would be very, very seriously injured. And when you talk about an earthquake, no one has suggested there's anything on the table that would prevent a release of this chemical if there was a large earthquake, which most of us happen to have in the background of our lives in LA, that as a potential reality. So we will be sending a letter, the Del Amo Action Committee will be submitting a letter congratulating the district for evaluating the safety measures that are in place and encouraging additional safety measures. But I am also thinking about things like that will never get us to zero risk. Are there other alternatives? For example, the use of pressurized buildings that could enclose these tanks, the possibility of moving the tanks away from all the other equipment, and that was certainly one of the contributing factors in the February 15th explosion. The possibility of putting these tanks underground and having them controlled so that if there was a release, it would not leave that area. And I'm just encouraging the district not to be swayed by arguments from the refineries when they say things like there's no technical scientific reason to not use this chemical, when in fact there's very important technical scientific reasons not to use this chemical. Other refineries that are exploring alternatives and actually going to employ alternative uses. So I'm just here again arguing that the district not back off from their commitment to require that HF be phased out from use at these two refineries.
Thank you, Florence.
Thank you very much.
I hope you continue to participate in the work group process on this.
I will, for
Okay.
sure.
So we managed to go a couple minutes over. Nonetheless, I believe this was the last item. We will be meeting again. What's the date for the next meeting?
November 17th.
November 17th. Thank you very much.
Public comment?